the recording right now. And what we are doing right now is we're at the Fine Arts Zoom session. We have two wonderful employees, sorry, from the Museum of Fine Arts to present on some different aspects of what they do during the day, tips and tricks to get a job, that kind of thing. Okay. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Noelle Bassey, and I work here at the Harrington Center at the college with my coworker director, Jen Talkman, who is also on this call. There she is, she's waving. And we're here as a resource for you guys. And this is what we're doing in place of actual live events. We're having employers come and they can be from the comfort of their own home to kind of talk about opportunities. And I felt like this was especially relevant during this time for our fine arts students, because as we were discussing earlier, the fine arts arena has been hit especially hard with COVID. You know, there's no performances going on. People just recently only started going back to museums. So I want to introduce our two guests today, Joy Bloser and Luiza DeCamargo. So Joy is waving and Luisa's there. Where is she? There she is. Okay. So I just want to tell you a little bit about them and then we can get started. I'm hoping that you guys have plenty of questions at the end. Feel free to use the chat, raise your hands. I believe I gave you all, well, yeah, you all are unmuted. So please engage and ask questions and make this a useful resource for you. Okay, so our first guest, Joy Bloser, is an objects conservator specialized in the care of modern and contemporary art with a specialty in plastics. She is currently the assistant conservator for the contemporary art and public outreach at the MFA Boston. Prior to working at the MFA, she completed a 2-year sculpture conservation fellowship at the Museum of Modern Art in New York and trained in conservation labs at the Costume Institute at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum, and the Newport Preservation Society. She holds an MS in conservation and an MA in art history from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU and a BA in Chinese and art history from Middlebury College. She is a contributing Chinese translator to Leap magazine and Yishu, am I pronouncing that right, Joy? Journal, and is on the board of the Contemporary Art Network for the American Institute for Conservation. And our next guest, Luiza, is a development officer at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, tasked with fundraising from institutional partners such as foundations and corporations. She comes to this work from previous roles in managing an annual fund and supporting membership activities, but also as a contemporary craft curator. With a master's degree in the history of decorative arts, Luiza's career has taken her from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum to the Asheville Art Museum and then the Society of Arts and Crafts, with a stopover at the feminist think tank Wellesley Centers for Women before landing at the MFA. She is currently participating in the Institute of Nonprofit Practices Core Certificate Program, a leadership training program in partnership with Tufts University. Luiza brings her values to work with her: diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, the importance of centering her community around the arts, the power of collaboration and empathetic leadership. She sits on the Norfolk Cultural Council in Norfolk, Massachusetts, where she lives with her spouse and dog. So please welcome Joy and Luiza. And Luiza, if you would like to start things off, that would be wonderful.
Sure, thanks for having me, everybody. I guess I'll start with a really, thank you, Noelle, for the introduction, but add a few more things to the bio, and then I want to get into some definitions. So I didn't mention anything about my undergrad, but I have a degree in sociology and anthropology from the University of North Carolina at Asheville. And I think that that is useful to share because it really informs why I'm interested in objects and people and the intersection of the artwork that we produce. When I was in college, it was like at the very, very end. It's like the last, I took 5 years to get through college. I had to take a little victory lap. At the very end, I realized like, oh, this is what I love. I started like hanging out with like the art department kids who are like the coolest kids in college, and started actually firing an onigami kiln with my then boyfriend, my like college boyfriend, and really just loved that really hands-on aspect of craft. So with that as my introduction into the world of art objects, I went into my master's program through the history of decorative arts, and really took a slightly more scholastic approach to kind of like the living that crafted lifestyle. When I was in graduate school, I had the opportunity for a paid internship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. So it was that moment where I wasn't exactly sure. I think it was like my first year of grad school. I was applying for internships. I had applied for art and artifacts at the Holocaust Museum, but membership called me back. And they were like, you know, offered a paid internship. And I was like, yes, I'll do it. Absolutely, whatever this is. And it really was a blessing. It was a surprise. And it was something that I felt was incredibly rewarding. It was enriching. It was very meaningful. Before we go any further, I want to define development. So quick show of hands, does anybody know what a development office does? Great. Let's learn. The development office is the fundraising arm of an institution. In a college, it might be called resources or advancement. We call it development at the MFA. And I was having a conversation with friends or colleagues in my leadership group, and we were like, oh, fundraising, but realized that fundraising is just the moment where you connect resources to ideas. And that's definitely something that I could stand behind. At the Holocaust Museum, membership department, again, falls under the development office. And we were raising gifts under $5,000. So anything from like an $18 gift, $5 gift, any contribution was a really meaningful way to kind of to show your belief or your trust in the institution and participate in you know, fulfilling the mission. It's really kind of like a all hands on deck. Everybody can pitch in. And that's what I really appreciated about membership is that it was this low dollar fundraising that was really democratic. It was $5, $10, you know, and you could make a real difference. So in an office, there was a team of 5 of us. We raised $10 million annually in low dollar donations. And I'm making a distinction here between low dollar or membership, and then you move into major gifts. And major gifts is a different kind of beast, but again, it's still connecting. It's giving your audience, your people, your members, your guests, an opportunity to pitch into the mission. So major gifts, you do it at a slightly higher level. It's usually, there's a threshold of, you know, different museums, you know, gifts of 10,000 and above, gifts of whatever. But what you do is, it's an opportunity to build relationships and to really build an opportunity to hear from your donors and to really connect their assets, which they want to give away, to awesome programs like a conservation center, an exhibition, a teen arts council. And major gifts, it's incredibly rewarding. It's incredibly rewarding work. And again, that's really relationship based. So major gifts officer, at the MFA, we call them leadership gifts officers. They have a portfolio. So from within our database, officers are assigned, and please chime in if or raise your hand if I'm going too fast or if you have any questions. So officers are assigned a portfolio, different people based on giving history, wealth screen overlays, which means you can kind of plug in kind of like a computer program over names in your database, and it matches like property records and giving histories and public information so that you can kind of get a sense of folks' capacities to give. Now, my role is a little bit different. I'm still a development officer, but I am an institutional giving officer. So in my role, I fundraise to institutions, which can be a corporation like, hey, the New Balance Foundation, or it could be a community foundation like the Boston Foundation, or it could be a family foundation like the Barr Foundation. Recently, I got a gift from the Keith Haring Foundation for a grant that's going to go to bringing a band called Gray to the MFA. Gray was actually Jean-Michel Basquiat's old band, so it's going to be a really cool public program that goes side by side with the exhibition, so it's pretty rad. But I think that slightly different than our major gifts officers in my role is a lot of writing, so proposal writing. And it's something that I did not really expect to do. I'll let you know how I got into that in a second, but you kind of have to follow the rules. You'll go to a foundation and they'll say like, oh, on October 1st, please submit a proposal that says this, this, and this. Please include a budget. Please include this kind of thing, this list. So it's in some ways kind of almost like a college application or a grad school application. There's a deadline and there's content that you have to present. Sometimes it's photos, budgets, whatever. So it can be pretty straightforward, unless it's not. So how did I get into my current role? And this is, I think, good advice for anybody at any stage in their career. I was looking to make a shift when I was the curator at the Society of Arts and Crafts. Kind of got to a moment where I wasn't sure what was going to be next for me in the institution. I was like, you know what, maybe it's time to move on. So I reached out to my network and reached out to, and I asked for an introduction to Cameron Mason, who was then the VP of Resources at Wellesley College. My husband teaches at Wellesley College. He had just, I think was in the process of getting tenure, just got tenure, but he asked if it would be appropriate for me to meet with her, and Cam gave me 30 minutes of her time. She's a really lovely human being. And we chatted for 30 minutes. I asked, how did you get your start? What's the most interesting part of fundraising? What's the most challenging part? And then I asked her a question that I think kind of got me this job. I was like, in nonprofits, no org is ever completely staffed. If you could have an extra person on your team right now, who would it be and what would their role be? And she said it would be a development officer, another person to do foundations and government giving. I was like, So when Cam moved to the Museum of Fine Arts, she's now our chief development officer. She's our division leader. So of all the development team, Cam's on top. She's part of leadership team, or LT, as we call it. Cam had some spots on her in the org chart that needed to be filled. She remembered me. She remembered our conversation. She forgot my name, but she's like, about her. And so reached out to me to apply. And so that was my introduction to the Museum of Fine Arts. So no experience necessarily in foundations and government fundraising, but what did I have? I had a knowledge of exhibitions and public programs. I had that passion that really you can convey what's important and why it matters. I am a strong writer. I love the editing process, listening to other people's feedback. So very much a team player. And those were the things that I made sure that Cam knew, both when we chatted, but also in my application, because those are skills that you can really take anywhere. I have two pieces of advice for you guys. One is to really network. And at first you're like, oh my God, what's networking? Networking is not necessarily going to like boring coffees or cocktails. Networking is kind of staying in the loop of what's happening in your field. It's reaching out to friends and to friends of friends. It's not just building your own networks, but it's also welcoming people into your networks. I recently heard a statistic that between 80 and 85% of hires are network hires. That was hard for me to hear because sometimes our networks are not very diverse. So the challenge, what I'm challenging myself, what I'm challenging my coworkers and my colleagues, my dog just walked in, hey bud, is to really expand your networks to be inclusive, to welcome people into your conversations. You know, when you're standing around a coffee or a cocktail party, you know, scoot back just one step and make space for somebody else to join. My other little snapshot of advice is to always look at job descriptions, even if they're not for your job or for a job that you're not qualified for. Because looking at other job descriptions is going to give you a snapshot of what employers want, maybe what different roles, what the different responsibilities of different roles are, how you might work with that different role in an organization or another. And it also can be pretty aspirational. You know, I'm not there yet, but to get there, I know that I need to ... And it helps you kind of forward think through your career. Careers are not straightforward. They're not just like ladder, climb. Your interests will take you different places. A spouse or somebody special might take you to a different city. A paid opportunity might arise maybe a little bit out of, like, I don't really know about this. So there's a lot of doors always opening. I encourage you to
that is a good question. I don't know. We can research it after this.
Hey, Hillary, could you please mute your mic? I think you
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You
got a little kid in the room.
That's fine. You know, life will take us different ways. Now in this COVID moment, we're all doing different jobs. I was furloughed. And then when I came back to the MFA, I suddenly had a different job description. I was doing more corporate work. And so that's new to me. And that's, again, like, all right, cool. And you just make it work. So that was a lot. Should we do some follow-ups now or later? Noelle, I'll take it.
Why don't we, since it's fresh in our minds, why don't we follow up now? And I have a question to start up things if nobody else does, but I would really love if students did. If you had any thoughts, oh, that's a great idea, comments, questions. If not, I do. So Luiza, here at Colby Sawyer, we're very invested in the whole diversity, inclusion, equity piece that I saw that you're pretty passionate about. And I'm just wondering how that informs your work in fundraising.
There's a blog that, it's like the one blog that I read. It's called Nonprofit AF by a guy named Vu Le. And Vu he's like an executive director out of Seattle. And in this blog post, he's always kind of asking the tough questions. And recently he and some colleagues put together a website, excuse me, that is called Community-Centric Fundraising. And what they say about CCF is that it's not an organization, it's not rules, it's a movement. And what CCF has taught me, they have like 10 principles. I really, really recommend that y'all check it out, especially if you're kind of curious about nonprofit organization. CCF, community-centric fundraising, kind of asks us to consider the models we use, why and how, what happens within our traditional fundraising models, and it really offers a really good critique. In nonprofits of all kinds, fundraising department has power. It is often some of the highest paid work at a nonprofit. It's also, you know, when we also have that kind of institutional power of, all right, I'm going to fundraise for that, which means that project happens. Or it's like, I really don't think that's fundraisable. So, when people make those kinds of comments in a meeting, suddenly something can get on the back burner. So can you imagine, for example, 10 years ago, I'm just making this up, what would have happened if we had some really awesome exhibition proposals where maybe the staff was not diverse, very traditional, and they were like, oh, that project, I don't think we can do that. That's not really what our audience wants. I don't really think I can fundraise for it. Suddenly you're going to get a bunch of boring shows that don't push the envelope, that don't challenge. When you get a fundraising staff that's like, heck yeah, it's going to be hard, but we're going to do it. Then you can start doing things like, all right, teen arts councils, paid internships, the Black Histories, Black Futures exhibitions. You can start thinking through, and this is by no means just projects that, a fundraising team has the power to advance or not. Leadership team you've got to get from the top down for these big initiatives, these institutional changing initiatives. But when you have a team that says, let's make it happen, yes, let's match the resources to the idea, then things get to move forward. They don't get backburnered. They don't get like, let's table that. So even within a fundraising office, as you're bringing in more diverse voices, you can challenge things like, yeah, that might be a tough thing to work for, but let's make it happen. My colleague Stephanie, who's a genius, and I'm obsessed with her, Kavya, she made a beautiful observation the other day. She said, if I know my portfolio, if I know the people, the families that I fundraise with too, and I only pitch to them things that they'll be into, so it's kind of like very donor-led projects, she's like, how am I going to, kind of challenge the system? What happens then if you could change a strategy? This is why I like the low dollar fundraising so much. If you change that strategy and say, okay, you know what? We're not going to ask that big wig, old school donor to fund this. Let's take it down a notch and see who maybe from the community really believes in this project. And maybe we'll ask them to brainstorm with us the challenges. What do we need to, maybe we'll invite them in to that conversation early. This is like a fundraising little adage. If you want advice, ask for money. If you want money, ask for advice. So again, it's this moment of like building trust, welcoming your community in, and really leading from the folks that know best, from the folks that say, hey, this is what my community needs, this is what my community wants, and I'm going to participate, I'm going to be part of this idea, of this project. You end up getting a lot farther than, it's a very patriarchal system where like, this is what the audience wants to see. This is what the community needs to have. It's just a completely different model. Community-centric fundraising, it's awesome, look it up.
So you have to use some of your artistic creativity to kind of move the fundraising forward and coming up with different ideas for different people, not just the same group that you've always worked with, thinking outside the box.
Strategy involved. And that's something that as I grow in my career, I want to learn to think big picture and kind of like 3 steps ahead. Strategy is something that I'm not really yet invited to participate in. So I'm trying to, especially through my, the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, through I call it Nonprofit Night School. Through Nonprofit Night School, I'm trying to get these skills so that I can, as I move up, I'll be able to really fully participate in these conversations.
Does anybody have any thoughts or questions for Luiza? We're going to come back. Go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, students, doesn't anybody want to say, like, can I intern with you? I'll save that for the end.
And we'll give you some time. We're going to kind of circle back and give you time with both of these ladies, but just want to, maybe you can let the questions gel a little bit. But Joy, if you'd like to take your turn and tell us about your track and what you do at the MFA.
Thanks. Thanks. And Luiza, you do such good work in conservation, we benefit a lot from fundraising because we spend a good ordeal of that money. So we really appreciate it in conservation for sure. I have some slides to show. Can I share my screen? Let's see. Did that work? Yes, no, yeah, okay, cool. So I wanted to, let's see if that's gonna work. Oh, that's not working. Huh. Okay, so I wanted to just put out my career path because it was really circuitous. So it's easier to put it out on a screen than to tell you all about it because it's, as Luiza said, it's really not that straight. I went to Middlebury and I graduated in 06 and I was absolutely in love with modern Chinese art. So like early 20th century ink painting, Chinese ink painting. And there's like one gallery in New York who works on that and that's kind of it. And I didn't get the in with the gallerists in New York. But so I ended up moving and I ended up working as a picture framer, which has come in tremendously in handy because it's such a, you can work anywhere in any city around the world with that skill. And it was like a really great place to get in the door. And it was a good way to get a lot of the artwork that I had to get it framed and things like that. So strongly recommend if you're looking around and finding places, like picture framing is always a very good go-to for that. And while I was there, I met a Chinese art curator in Vancouver. So I was doing research for him and I was working and he would pay me as grant money came in. So it was kind of an ebb and flow. So I worked full-time as a picture framer and I kind of waited tables as well. And I did research for this guy. And he was the one that I was kind of putting my effort into, was like networking and things like that. And he ultimately ended up introducing me to a museum in China, in Beijing. And he set up the introductions and then I got to interview through and I ended up moving there to work on exhibition production and then was promoted into curatorial there for a couple of years, which was really exciting and really phenomenal work to be producing site-specific art installations and things like that. And it really got me into contemporary art and understand what's happening in the contemporary art field around the world. And also the politics of showing art, of showing how does art travel around the world? How does it come in and out of a country, and, you know, import and export laws and loans and things like that. And while I was there, it was interesting because I was working on an exhibition and artwork got damaged and I had to handle the insurance company. And the insurance company needed a conservator to tell me how bad the damage was. So I had to find a conservator and I spent the entire day with this conservator and I was like, wait, what do you do? And I'd never heard of it. And I was so interested and I just peppered this guy with questions all day. And my contract was coming up for renewal at the museum and I didn't renew it. And I moved back home to Colorado to enroll in chemistry classes so that I could go to grad school to become an art conservator. So while I was doing that, because of my network that I'd formed, as Luiza said, like, I think most of my jobs have come out of networking. I started working for art fairs because it was seasonal. So it was around the college calendar. So I could drop into these art fairs and you could get paid and then you worked for them for like a month or a week or 3 months or things like that. And they're all over the world. So it's really helpful. You can find art fairs all over the place and it's really good side work. And that's how I funded most of my chemistry classes. And then I applied to school and I didn't get in my first year. There's only a handful of programs that do conservation and I was crushed. And then I had a, moment, is this for me? And I was like, no, I'm doing this. I took a lot of chemistry. I took a lot of all this other preparatory work. So I went back and I applied the second year. And I got in the second year at NYU. And I did, that program is a joint program of a Master's of Science and a Master's of Art. And then out of NYU, I got my fellowship at MoMA. And then from there, I just started at Boston in February, right before the furlough. So that was kind of a a fascinating jump. And I came to Boston to work on this program there's a brand new conservation center that Luiza's team has wonderfully fundraised for us. And it's this gorgeous facility. And I'll show you some pictures that we're still moving into and setting up and getting ready. And so I got hired to be a conservator to do public outreach, to talk about help design programming and learning and take everything that's always happens kind of behind the back door of the museum and in the underbelly of these museums and bring it forward, because conservation is such a fascinating kind of field that straddles fine art, studio art history, and then sciences, like all kinds of interesting like documentation and crazy imaging and a lot of computational science and data science and chemistry. And so it's a nice, like, you don't really have to split the left brain, right brain myth, you know, like you get to do all of it, which is really wonderful. So just in case to go to a definition of like conservation, conservation is kind of everything that involves preservation of cultural heritage in a really broad sense. So you have conservators on archaeological digs. You have conservators of buildings, you know, that are like historic envelopes and historic buildings. You know, you have conservators that just do like arms and armor, you know, or costumes and jewelry, sculptures and paintings and paper and textiles. And so all of that kind of has a lot of different avenues for what you're passionate about or your type of material. It's mostly divided by material types, right? And it's about like a lot of documentation. You learn all the intricacies and details of artwork to the nth degree. I think some people like going to museums with me and others don't, because I'm like really down at the details. I'm like, oh, how did you mount it like that? Why did you do that? But then other things, you know, really brilliant kind of what other, you know, application of a particular type of media or something like that is always really thrilling to see. And there's a lot of research, there's education, and there's preventive care. So what's really interesting is there's both tangible and intangible cultural heritage. So you got tangible, like the stuff like a sculpture, you know, that you see on a pedestal. You have intangible heritage like performance art, or histories, or, you know, like sound, those type of things that like is part of our cultural heritage that you have to figuring out ways to also preserve intangible cultural heritage, which is really can get really theoretical and fascinating in the philosophical bent, if that's interesting to you. So all conservators are either extensively trained either in grad school or through apprenticeship, and it's more and more going towards grad school. But there's some other ways in the to get into conservation that if you don't want to do the chemistry and all that stuff, there's other ways that like they call it kind of collections care is the other term for it. And that's more if you want to go in through like mount making, or if you really love your craft and studio and stuff like that, and you want to work with the artworks in the same way, but without the documentation, without that kind of other hardcore research edge. Mount making is a really awesome field, and I can point you towards some resources for that. So there's a specific code of ethics in what we do and how we apply what we fix and what we don't. So probably what you guys have seen is with conservators are kind of in the milieu for right now for like all the additions on the monuments right now for like all the spray paint. And so whether or not we clean it off or not is a big decision centered around conservation. And so it's really interesting to think about as conservators that we choose which histories you all see in a museum. We choose what layer that you go back to, you know, like the marbles, the white marble that you see in like old Roman kind of galleries was really heavily painted, but we had a really long period where people thought that white marble should be all perfectly white. And so they were scrubbed, you know, by kind of precursors of our field in conservation. So there's a lot of decisions about how you experience the art is decided by a conservator or by a collections care specialist, by a mount maker. And there's a lot of different settings, you know, like you've got, you can work in private practice, you can work in museums, you can work in foundations, you can work for private collectors. There's kind of all different avenues for it. I will say that I think what's been interesting for me is that conservation tends to be more expensive. So it is definitely a field that follows like higher economic situations. So like it's harder to find a job, say in a rural part of the country where there's not a huge accumulation of wealth attached to that, or collections of art collections around, so like that's been a little bit geographically challenging, that you kind of to move a lot for the art that you're going towards. I have a treatment, but I wanted to show you guys, so the other side of conservation, we do a lot of treatment on objects, is we get to do a lot of interesting like material analysis and investigative analysis. So we are all trained how to do x-rays. So these are all really cool x-rays that I got to take of different artworks. The top middle is Neil Armstrong's glove that he wore to the moon, which is really interesting. The bottom left is that monkey that you saw on the previous slide. So you can see like the armature of a taxidermied monkey, and like how like the head kind of goes through with the white. And so it's really fun to look at different layers of artwork that you get to do through all these really fascinating tools. So this is like an x-ray machine that we've got a whole suite, and you learn how to use and manipulate. And then we do stuff through UV, so through like, if you have like a black light, you can see like all the specks on your clothes, or if you haven't, something's been washed or something. So that's a fluorescence, and it responds to light differently. So we learn how to manipulate different wavelengths of light to see different parts of the artwork that you wouldn't see with your regular eye. So on the right, a former colleague of mine, and she's the Philadelphia Museum of Art, she took this, and this is an infrared image in infrared. And I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a figure that got painted out. So you're seeing the infrared of the painting. And can you see there's a guy that's standing off to the right, and he's been painted out of the painting. I don't know if you can kind of see a bit of a shadow. I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but this is him right here. And so it's really fun, is like you get to use all these different techniques to investigate artworks from the past, and kind of you really learn a lot more about technique, materials, how people kind of made decision-making through the process, which I really enjoy. So for training to get in, because it's a thing to get in to schools, there's 4 programs, and they're in green because they pay you money, which is important for grad school. So you get a sizable amount of the tuition, and you get a living stipend and things like that. It's not full coverage, but it's probably like, I think it's 85 to 90% to go for 3 or 4 years. And those are the 4 programs, and they each kind of specialize in different things. If you're interested in any fashion or textile conservation, FIT, they offer an MA, and it's great because they offer part-time options. And that's how you go into like all the costume shows and those types of things. And then architecture and historic preservation is like the building envelope, those type of historic structures, like the Statue of Liberty, those type of massive things. That's Columbia and UPenn. And then there's a handful of like internships that you do while you're at school, and before you get into school, and after. So there's like pre-program, there's during program, and there's post-program. And program being your MA or your graduate program. So while you guys are in undergrad, if you have interest in this, I wish I would have taken my chemistry while I was still at Middlebury instead of going back to do it. But you more or less are doing kind of like a joint major between art history and chemistry, and a minor in studio art, or like, a studio art and chemistry joint with a minor in art history, but it's kind of those 3. And then, or you can sprinkle in some other things of like sciences, computer science, foreign language history. And now with more born digital artwork, and all of like kind of like art with a plug, there's a lot more turn towards computer science, replacing a lot of those chemistry requirements. So if you're interested in like what's happening in AR, VR art and things like that, or, any sort of like software-based art, things like that, hardware-based art, then that's also totally an option. So I want to show the labs. They're under construction right now, but Luiza did a great job, and they're really beautiful. And I hope that maybe in the future you guys can come and visit them. But here on the left is the Paintings and Objects Conservation Lab. So it's really open spaces, and these are like fume hood trunks that like kind of come down because we use a lot of volatile solvents, you guys know, with like varnish removal or things like that, with ethanol and acetone and different types of solvents. And on the right is the Mount Maker Studio. And I encourage you guys, we have an Instagram feed, MFA Conservation, and we feature also the Mount Makers. If you guys want to see, there's like a lot of cool videos and stuff of what different specialties do, but it's a good way to kind of understand more of what people do in conservation. And here on the left is Xin Cheng, and she's doing, she's in the Asian Conservation Studio. MFA Boston is one of the 4 museums in the country with a dedicated Asian conservation studio. So for paintings, Chinese paintings, Japanese paintings, and Himalayan 2D, two-dimensional art, which is specific in the materials and the handling, and the entire space is dedicated for it. And it's a really rare and wonderful space to work in. And then on the right, we have a textile conservation lab, we have a paper conservation lab. So if you guys are interested in conservation, I'm always happy to chat more on how you get into it and things like that. But let's see. Yeah, so I will stop sharing my screen. Come back soon. Oh, there it is, okay.
Well, that was great, thank you. Do any students have any thoughts or comments or ideas or questions? I definitely, oh, Grant, go ahead and unmute yourself. And
with the conservation, do you guys like restore like art pieces for like because I've seen like I think I saw a video back in high school with this one painting, and they were restoring it. It was a really cool process, and looked like it took like a lot of care and skill.
Yeah, so we do, restoration kind of falls under the umbrella term of conservation. So sometimes, like, if you saw that monkey image, that was a before and after image of what I did to it. So like before, he was really damaged and had lost his whole beard. So I like had to figure out how to restore his beard, you know, and find what kind of hair was the most sympathetic to that type of, like, the original structure. We also do it in sculpture or in paintings if there's like a loss, if like, you know how like paintings will flake and crack and chip moss. So sometimes those cracks are disfiguring, but it's like sometimes those cracks are a craquelure, right? And they have value, like in 14th century panel painting and 15th century panel painting. But maybe in modern paintings, we don't want to see so many cracks. So we might, you know, put in some adhesive into those cracks, lay them back down, and then inpaint in between them so you can't actually see that crack system, and it doesn't interfere with like a visual unity of the piece. But it's interesting because the interventions that we do, there's definitely waves of how interventive you're choosing to be, like how heavy-handed, how much am I going to interfere in time that's passed on his artwork, and then how little I'm going to interfere. So I think there's currently kind of a swing towards intervening less, you know, and everything that we do, we try to make sure that it's either reversible or removable or retreatable. So if I use a material, for instance, and I decide that this piece of this sculpture fell off and I'm gonna put it back on, like the King Tut's tomb guy, remember when the chin, like the beard got broken off from the tomb or something? And everybody was like up in arms because this woman used epoxy to put it back on. Which actually was kind of it was an okay use of epoxy. I mean, what we would have loved is that she had a barrier layer between the epoxy and the original surface so that it wouldn't have affected the original surface, and then you'd be able to remove that epoxy join later on. And so we do a lot of stuff with like reversibility and the idea of perhaps I might be wrong in my decision, and in 20 years time or 10 or 5 or 100, that my decision should be able to you should be able to go back pre-me in the history of the artwork. So it's definitely a push-pull. It's a huge negotiation. We talk a lot with the curators, or we bring in different stakeholders like if it's owned by a collection or a foundation, or if there's a relative of the artist or a studio assistant who worked with the artist, or there's documentation. I mean, there's a lot of other things, and you kind of pull together. You're like, so do you think it goes here? Like, is this the best spot for it? You know, and we make the decision if we're confident, but if not, then it's better to not do anything and wait, and maybe more information will come to light. So it's kind of an interesting balance. And there's certain fields where in object conservation, you know, it's a lot, I would say that it's a larger amount of craft involved. You do a lot of different like sculpting and loss compensation, and you kind of create a lot more mold making and things like that to create three-dimensional shape. And then you have in paper, you know, that's a lot more, it's very delicate. And in paintings, I think that paintings conservation is very patience oriented. They can spend a year on a painting, and that's a lot. So, or 2 years or 5 or something, yeah.
It sounds like it's a definite process, a learning curve also, because you're going back to, well, hopefully this epoxy works, right? And also learning from that. Yeah, and it just seems like a huge process in terms of learning and not always being right, and just kind of going for it, kind of using your creativity from what it sounds like to me. So, Luiza.
Joy. Your job has a different component where you're asked to engage with the public a little bit. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's maybe different than some of your other jobs? Why it's maybe a unique role, and why we even have that role?
So I think I'm officially the first conservator in the country for public outreach. MFA is the first kind of like museum who's kind of moved towards this, because conservation has a lot of stories to tell, and it's, as you can see, there's a lot of intricacies to it. And so going through third parties to try to like have, you know, somebody else tell the stories has been difficult in the past, I think, for conservation labs. So what the MFA's solution was, like, let's put a conservator in that role who wants to talk about what they do and how they do it. So it's been really interesting, because what I've found is that I thought I was going to be doing a lot of outreach towards the public, but of COVID, that kind of like changed and shifted, and now pivoted a lot towards digital content and thinking about how we're putting ourselves digitally out there, you know, and engaging with people. But then also realizing that a lot of the outreach also involves just broader sense in the art world to my colleagues at the museum, and thinking about making sure that we have terminology down, that people know what we're doing, and that we can share and how we can help each other back and forth. And it's a lot of relationships. I mean, as Luiza was talking earlier, it's so important to be able to have the ability to communicate with all of your colleagues who have all different interests, and everybody's kind of going for this pinnacle idea of, you know, presenting art. But we can all do that together in a really interesting way that I appreciate in my new role. So yeah, so it's different in that I don't do, since coming back from COVID, my job has changed a little bit, like Luiza said, and I've doing some treatment as well on contemporary art, as well as doing public outreach. So I'm also working towards thinking about how we can talk about conservation in an interesting and a deep way that doesn't have to be sugar-coated, so that I trust you guys are all kind of think you guys are all studio or art interested people. Like, to get in the nitty-gritty of materials is fascinating for a lot of people, and we don't need to roll that back to understand it. So it's kind of exciting to bring that forward and like let people go down the rabbit holes of conservation that are so fascinating.
This is one of those intersections that we're really proud of at the MFA, where it's STEAM, not just STEM. So we're putting the science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And it also is giving us, this whole conservation center, this whole public outreach, it's giving us an opportunity to engage with Boston's tech community in a way that we really hadn't before. So we're actually using this as a way of engaging our young ones. We have a STEAM team of teenagers We're also doing some fundraising around this, for example, for corporate, where we're asking some of our, like the biotech firms to support this kind of work. So it's really cool that at the MFA, it's one moment where you can really see this intersection of different modes of thinking, different practices, different areas of expertise, different interests. And it's really cool because the Conservation Center is one of those places where like everything aligns just really beautifully. So thanks, Joy, for that role. It's a really awesome role.
Right now I'm having the very fun job of spending the money that you're fundraising and from the corporate partners to develop STEAM programming, but it's all going to have to be pretty digital. So we're outfitting this digital classroom, and we have just started looking at this. Have you guys seen the 3D scanners, like this Artec spider scanners? You can like scan an artwork, and then you can get the point model for a 3-dimensional object that allows you to like rotate it in space. So like figuring out how to do that. So then we could actually talk about the artwork, you know, and I could give you guys an artwork right now, and you could spin it around, and we could talk about the different bits of it, which would be really exciting.
I have a question for the students. I'm going to take a quick poll for you guys. How many of you are thinking of going to grad school after you graduate? Okay, and does anybody feel comfortable saying what they might want to major in or what they want to get their master's in? Nope. But you do want to continue your education. Okay, so my thought going into this was, while we all hope our students are going to be the next Picasso, that would be awesome. You know, we wanted to get out there that there's more jobs than just creating the art. There is curating the art, there's conserving the art, there's educating people about the art, and fundraising for the arts. So I'm just wondering, for Joy and Luisa, are you still able to create while you're like, are you still like feeling like you're an artist and like being able to create? Luisa or Joy, whichever.
When
That's really pretty easy. I get to do it, work my hands every day. So I do, yeah, I have like a ridiculous amount of different size paintbrushes that I'm always looking for another size. So,
Yeah.
Do you have a studio practice, Joy?
Sorry?
Do you have a studio practice? Like
I do private work, so I take private conservation work. So I have a studio where I do that there. But in doing my own art, I find conservation work to be sufficient for me.
Luisa, are you able to actually create?
Well, when I was furloughed, I had a little come to Jesus moment where I really tried to find like my inner artist. I did The Artist's Way. Do you guys know about that book? Yes, no?
Heard of it.
It's like a self-help book, like finding your inner artist. So I did it with a group of friends. We kind of book clubbed it. And I have been doing textile art. So I learned I've been quilting. I did like a ton of masks. So more and more I'm trying to do some sewing. I've been doing garment making. But I really like to kind of like clock out of work, like close my computer and then use my weekends and my evenings to like do artwork for myself.
Great. Okay. Any students? Colleen?
Hi, so I'm actually a history and political science major, but I'm minoring in studio art. So I know you mentioned about like the history and all the documentation behind it. So I was wondering what kind of like potential career opportunities you have for that.
If you like provenance research is so cool. I don't know if you know much about it, but there's departments across all museums that have it. And they're researching return of artifacts to make sure that we got everything that's in the museum is supposed to be there, is like got there without any horribly ill-begotten ways. I mean, there's a threshold that they kind of decide upon. But so the provenance researchers are some of my most favorite people. Like they come up and the one I worked with at MoMA, she was a specialist on kind of Nazi looted art. And so she knew all the different stamps and numbering and like stuff like that. So we got to like look at the bottom of the sculpture, and I learned so much from her. But she dug through archives, which was great, and like book bill of sales and things like. But archives, I think archives and I love provenance research. I think it's fascinating. I would totally do that.
Thank you.
I thought immediately of public history projects. My husband is a historian, so he teaches history for grad students. Public history can be anything like the National Park Service, where they have awesome materials of like, what are you seeing? Why is it important? Historical houses are awesome. And that could be anything from like an old mansion to a cabin where enslaved people live. It could be farm sites. You can have, costume collections or furniture collections or prints, or there's so many ways to interpret collections from a historical lens. Another graduate school avenue that is awesome is library school. There's ILS, Information and Library Sciences degrees, where you can take a track to to do archival work. Sometimes those programs will have a subtract with like museum libraries, or similarly like a university library. There's a whole world of rare books, which is way cool. And then of course there's like community engagement, there's more digital work. If some of y'all are thinking about, what's next for me, library school offers a lot of avenues to go.
Thank you.
So I just had a super quick question. Since currently right now I'm trying to find like an internship of some form, and since I'm a graphic design major, I don't know if like the MFA or any other like museum places are needing remote design work, or if like anywhere I could reach out to.
Do you want to go, Luiza?
Yeah, our internship program is on pause right now until maybe summer. Wait, where are we at right now? Or spring, I'm not exactly sure. It's like always changing. And we're doing an effort right now to pay all of our interns, which I think is really the way to go for people. It's a way for us to not be undervalued in our work. And I think what's also important is for field-wide change. If our starting salary is $0, that doesn't give us a lot of room for growth. And it also means that not everybody has an equal chance of getting into the field. So I would really encourage you to fight for a paid internship. I think it's the right thing to do for yourself, I think for the field ethically. But people, yes, indeed, are taking distance interns. And I know that y'all use Handshake. I think Handshake's always a really great site. Now, because there's a lot of places that are digital, is there somewhere in maybe your hometown or another city? Sometimes I just recommend going to like, ooh, I've always wanted to work there, and go to their website and see what's on, see what's available. In Massachusetts, there's a website called hireculture.org, HIRE, and that posts jobs in the nonprofit sector. If you get on different listservs or different kind of groups, the Association for Art Museums, AAM, Women in Development, WID, now and then you'll see jobs posted. You can always go to places like, I don't know if like the cultural, like Mass Cultural Council sometimes has jobs posted, things like that. But now and then does like a lot of cross-listing and cross-posting, and then just like keep your eye and just like, jobs are a numbers game. Internships, applying for jobs, it's a numbers game. It's annoying, but you just have to like deal with it and just apply. You're going to apply for a lot of jobs that you're qualified for, like totally have like, oh yeah, of course, you're not going to get a call back from, but you just got to keep going.
In terms of the title of the person that students would reach out to in any given organization, like Joy, I know you're a public outreach person. So would they necessarily go to you? Not to say that, you are that person, but I mean, public outreach makes me think or in community education, that kind of thing? Like, what's the title, I would ask?
Often we're moving everything for internships is all going now through the education department.
Education, okay.
So,
that makes
and
sense.
I've seen a big shift. I don't know if Luisa, you've seen the same thing, but a lot of other museums are also funneling all conservation or like all internships through the education programming.
Mhm.
And so that applications are becoming less network based and more broad so that you can actually get in if you don't know somebody there. But on top of that, I would also say like stalk the employers. I would like make sure you know where they've been, who they are, look them up on LinkedIn and find out if you have a second or a third or whatever, and especially your alumni network. I get a lot from the Middlebury Alumni Network. And I always make sure I reach out. And if there's anyone in the entire museum or the place of work that went to your same college, make sure you reach out to them. You absolutely should. Like that's one of your networks you jump off of. Or if somebody who's from the same town as you, I'm from Colorado. So I will always reach out to somebody who's from Colorado, even if I have no reason to know them. But it's a numbers game. You got to keep pushing out and reaching out. And I really stress, like Luisa did, is getting an informational interview. If there's not a job, you can call and you can ask for a 30-minute to a 45-minute or even an hour informational interview. And you're going to ask them, like you're talking to us, about how they got where they are. What do they think about their career? Stuff like that. Do they have any recommendations? You know, things like that have been really helpful. And then as I've moved along in my career, I've like found kind of like my mentorship people that I always make sure that I tell when I'm applying somewhere and ask them if they have any ideas or thoughts on that application. And they're typically either in my field or allied field, and they're, you know, higher positions, and they might know somebody then. So it's kind of like, it's, you know, it's numbers and relationships for sure.
Yeah, networking and resources and talking to people, right? That's the bottom line, and getting yourself out there. Definitely put yourself out there for sure. I want to make sure I'm not giving anybody the opportunity they need to ask any last questions that you might have. Joy gave you her email. Oh, here we go. Oh, Luisa and Joy. Thank you, Hillary. Well, I hope that this helped students I really kind of wanted to give you some hope in terms of like there is stuff out there for arts students, and you have a future. And I just wanted to, like, I think most of you, and I don't know, I said I think, I mean, you want to create, and you still can create, okay? That's what an artist does. But there's so many different aspects, and the field is so dynamic that, you know, you don't want to limit yourself. There's just so much out there that you can do, and you can still be around art and be in the art world. And I think Luisa and Joy really are stellar examples of that. They have this amazing background in art and creating, but they've taken that and they've been innovative with it. And I think that's the idea, is innovation. You know, your path may not be super straight, but you know, it's your path. And there is stuff out there for you guys. And I just want you guys to remain that hope, because I know COVID one day will end and we will get back to seeing things live and, you know, actually being able to go to a museum. I do think MFA people are coming back, right? Yeah, I feel like I saw that on the website that, yeah, we're now allowing people in. So anyway, hopefully this did help you out. And Joy did share her email, so just please, you know, if there's any questions that she can answer, that would, oh, and also Luisa as well. So anyway, guys, thank you for joining. And Luisa and Joy, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and for being with us this evening. It was great to meet you virtually. And everybody have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye, Luisa.
Bye, Noelle.